Last night I heard this politician.
Human trafficking is a crisis across the country, and particularly in New Jersey. You know, we've got the World Cup coming here in 2026, and a lot of folks are raising the alarm and the red flag saying, we have a human trafficking problem. Let me tell you what I'm going to do as governor. We're not going to spend money on public service announcements or posters at the rest stops. That's not saving children. We're going to partner with a lot of great private groups out there that are educating and empowering law enforcement to look for the signs. We are going to aggressively work with the federal government and have a public-private partnership with these groups who are saving children. You know, there are thousands and thousands of kids that are stolen and taken every year and put into the sex trade. We need to save these children. There are plenty of groups out there. They just don't get the recognition or the funding or the help. And as governor, I'm going to make ending child trafficking through New Jersey a top priority. New Jersey is in desperate need of parental choice when it comes to education. Your money should follow your child. Now, we're going to need the legislature eventually to enact and implement what we call education savings accounts. Now, education savings accounts have worked in about 13 states across the country. And what that does is it allows parents to put aside some of those tax dollars to follow their kid into their choice of education, whether it be a charter school, a micro school, even homeschooling, or parochial schools. We need that in New Jersey. We're not going to get that in any first couple of years of the next administration. Why? Because we have a Democratic-led legislature. Even if the assembly changed, it doesn't matter because you've got a Senate that's run by Democrats who oppose school choice. So what am I going to do as governor? We're going to use the power of the executive order and take over some of the school districts where necessary to make sure that those children that are on a list for a charter school get into those charter school classrooms right away. What does that mean to you? Well, what it means to you is that it's 2/3 of the cost to educate a kid in a charter school than it is a traditional public school. So on day one, after I win the election on November 4th, November 5th, I'm going to be on the phone with investors that want to invest in New Jersey education. And we're going to roll up trailers into Camden and Trenton and Newark and make sure that those kids that are on the charter school list get into a classroom beginning day one, January 20th, after I take the oath of office. Then we're going to be able to show the legislature and the people of New Jersey the proof of concept that we're educating kids in a better way and we're reducing our costs. That's the best way to do it. And let me tell you, we're not going to leave our affluent communities out of this equation either, because just because you have a wealthy community that is pouring money into the state budget, we need to make sure that those kids get a quality education as well. It has to be equal across the board. We need to raise up our cities and make sure we're not punishing our suburbs at the same time. We need to equalize out the funding and have your money follow your kid. We're going to make first responders great again in the Garden State. Once we restore the cost of living adjustment, first responders will know that they will be able to afford to retire in New Jersey. That's a start of it. But we need to start aggressively recruiting in our law enforcement community, in our firefighter community. I'd like to see an end of Chapter 78, which has increased the cost of their health care to the point where you got cops and firefighters that retire and they're paying $800, $900 a month. It's absolutely outrageous for them to pay for their health care. We need to protect these guys. We need to also empower volunteer firefighters and put them on an equal level to the career firefighters. But when it comes to recruiting, guys, I want to raise the standards. I want to make it something that you have to achieve. I'd like to go into our classrooms, into our 7th and 8th grade classrooms in our high schools and have police officers be a steady and constant part of career days to talk about how great a life in law enforcement can be. And when you've got a governor that's going to have prosecutors and an attorney general that stands up for law enforcement, it's going to be a lot simpler to bring these guys in. We need to stop attacking our cops. And let me tell you, we're not going to balance our budget on the backs of cop salaries at all. I think our first responders ought to be paid more, not less. Guys, there's a huge opportunity now with the Trump tariffs because we are now in a position where we can start to invest in American ingenuity, American manufacturing. You know, New Jersey has only 200,000 manufacturing jobs. We used to have 500,000 or more. We need to bring back the small family business and start making things again. How do we do that? We need to gut all of the onerous regulations that are useless and don't protect the environment from these bureaucrats and radicals at the Department of Environmental Protection. We need to reduce the bureaucracy and the onerous regulations with the Department of Transportation, the DCA, all of these different departments, and make our state business friendly. How am I going to do it? I'm going to bring business leaders into our cabinet. We're going to bring business leaders into our government. We've already asked a lot of the questions, and I can tell you on day one, I'm probably going to cut about 1,000 regulations that we don't need. In part, the grass seed inspector, sorry, you're gone. You've heard me talk about that on the trail. Yes, we actually have that in existence in New Jersey. But bigger than that, we also need to cut our taxes. Our neighbors have all lowered their corporate business tax. Pennsylvania's lowered it down to 4.99%. Ours is the highest in the country, or the second highest now, north of 11%. We need to get our taxation under control, and I want to create economic opportunity zones across our counties to make sure that we have spots for businesses to be recruited, come here and hire people locally and give them 5 years corporate tax free. Why can't we do that? That investment is going to have a huge return in creating employment, making housing more affordable, and generating higher incomes for Garden State residents. Here's the thing. We know that even electing a Republican governor in 2025 that will take office in 2026 with the high likelihood of a Democratic assembly. Now, we know the Senate's going to be Democrat because the Senate's not up for election until 2027. So how do you deal with a legislature that will likely not want to work with a Republican? Very simple. Number one, I have a lot of appeal to Democrats. How do I know that? Because my audience, largest in the state when I was on the radio, a third of that audience were Democrats, a third were independents, and a third were Republican. So I know our ideas appeal to rank and file Democrats, which means we're going to get some traction and some pressure on those Democrats. But what am I going to do on day one? I'm not going to wait for the legislature. I'm going to use the powers of the executive. Do you know that the New Jersey governor is the most powerful executive in the entire country? That's right. Of all the governors, New Jersey has the most power. That means we can declare a state of emergency and start fixing things through executive orders. Now, that shouldn't be a long-term plan for anyone, but until we get a legislature elected that will undo the powers of the governor after we fix it, we've got to live within the rules that we have, and that means I can declare a state of emergency on public safety and reverse and suspend bail reform, start enforcing federal detainer orders, declare a state of emergency when it comes to transportation, and free up funding to start fixing our bridges, fill those sinkholes, all of the projects now that are caught up in bureaucracy because the legislature can't get out of their own way and the bureaucracy can't get out of their own way. All they do is add obstacles for average people. We can do a lot with the executive order, and I'm going to start and hit the ground running on day one. Moms have a hard job, and moms deserve a break. And I don't have to tell you that if you're a young mom who's made the decision that you want to stay home and raise your children, educate them, and work at home, no, not work remotely from a corporate job, but actually work to run the household. It's a big job. It's an important job. And as governor, I'm going to put a financial value on that job. I'll give you an example. I think the job of a mom, let's just use round numbers. Let's say it's worth $50,000 a year as an income. Well, if your dad is out there making $100,000, and I use mom and dad because honestly, it's mostly moms that make the decision to stay home. But yes, it'll apply to dads as well if they make that choice. But let's just take mom working at home, raising the kids, helping educate them, making sure that the house is running right, worth $50,000. Dad goes out and earns $100,000. I want to have a direct deduction, dollar for dollar. Take that $50,000 of the mom working at home, deduct it off of dad's $100,000 income, And now your household taxable income, only $50,000. That's how we incentivize more moms to make a choice that, quite honestly, many of them want to make, but they can't afford to make it. We need to empower mothers again in the Garden State. I'm a veteran, I'm a gun owner, and I'm a proud supporter of the Second Amendment. We need to reduce the number of gun regulations in New Jersey. We need to hold our government accountable to standing up for the Constitution. I think there ought to be a reciprocal license to carry. I mean, if you're licensed to carry in one state, you ought to be licensed in this state. Look, guys, this is about making sure that legal gun owners are empowered. We ought to be teaching gun safety in high school classrooms. We ought to be preparing kids to be able to be a responsible legal gun owner. And we need stand your ground to make sure that our homeowners can protect their families and their property. You know, when I was a kid, I grew up going to my great-grandmother's house for Sunday dinner. Yes, it was gravy, but that's an argument for another time. We don't see that as much today. Why? Because grandparents can't afford to stay here. Kids don't have the education or the jobs that they need to stay here. We are discouraging young families for trying to buy their first time home. So as a result, 7 out of 10 of the moves are out of state. We lose more than $3 billion in adjusted gross income. What's that doing? It's breaking up that family unit. We need to restore generational families in the Garden State by making life more affordable. Insurance costs are out of control in the Garden State. Just look at car insurance. I mean, how much are you paying now compared to what you were paying just 5 years ago? Part of the problem, you got Republicans like Jack Ciattarelli that support licenses for illegals. You know what that's doing? It's flooding the streets with uninsured motorists, and you're paying for that. The other problem is the Department of Banking and Insurance now has more than a 450-day delay on bringing new rates and products to market. So the insurance companies are also stuck. We need to change that, but we also need to follow the model of a great insurance company, Cure. What are they doing? They're not using credit score as a way of denying customers insurance. And I'm going to sign an executive order to force all insurance companies that are doing business in New Jersey that they can't use credit score as a way of denying someone coverage. Part of our solution on education is to change the mindset. Why is every kid shamed into going to college? You know, a lot of college kids don't want to be there. They're going to go 6 figures in debt, and they're not going to have any skill that they can use in the job market. What I'd like to do is create internships and drive some of those kids that will be better served out of debt and earning 6 figures as an electrician, an HVAC repair person, an iron worker, whatever it is. There are skilled trade jobs that are available. We're going to change the mindset of education, and we're going to empower career and technical education and our county colleges to make sure that there's opportunities for those kids in middle school and high school to go on to learn a skilled trade. We need to change health insurance in New Jersey. First of all, you shouldn't be fined for not having it. But the second thing, and this is to me critically important, we need to make sure that the health insurance companies that are doing business in New Jersey are covering things that actually make people healthier. We need to cover holistic healing, acupuncture, and chiropractic. Why is that not covered by your health insurance carrier? They're making billions and billions of dollars. So we need to fix the private market. We also need to audit the public market. These insurance companies are getting a payday every time a state worker or a police officer or a firefighter goes to the doctor. We need to make sure that we are reining in the management costs by auditing all the companies that do business in New Jersey. There are a couple things we have to do in order to really stand up and, more than just words, but act to support our men and women in uniform. We got to back the blue. How do we do it? Number one, I'm going to declare state of emergency for public safety, and we are going to suspend bail reform indefinitely. Number two, we're going to start working with the federal government to enforce federal detainer orders to make sure the bad guys are arrested and put behind bars. Number three, we need to make sure that we protect our cops on the street by changing the rules of engagement. I'm going to hire an attorney general who understands that we need to support qualified immunity, that we need to support police officers being proactive instead of reactive. I don't want a police officer hesitating in the line of duty that could cost them their life. We have to empower our cops to go do the right thing. So I'm going to interview every one of 21 county prosecutors and make sure that they stand up for the suspension of bail reform, that they stand up for qualified immunity, and that they support actually keeping criminals behind bars. And yes, that means we need to change the rules and start charging these teens, particularly going down to as young as 14, as adults. That is the only way we are going to recoup public safety and restore common sense and peace to our neighborhoods. Now, on the other side, we also have to protect our cops in retirement. And I tell my conservative friends on this, I'm a fiscal conservative. One of the best investments that we can make in our police officers and our firefighters is to get them the cost of living adjustment that was taken away by Republicans and Democrats back in 2011. We're going to restore it. And in my first budget and every budget thereafter, we're going to put a line item of $100 million that will pay to restore COLA. Not like my opponent Jack Chitterelli wants with a 10-year waiting period. That is absolutely absurd. You can't wait 10 years. 10 years, you're already moving out of state. And we have an obligation, not just to take care of these guys that fought for us, that ran toward the danger instead of away from it, but look, guys, it makes fiscal sense. You want all these cops and firefighters to stay in New Jersey. A lot of these guys go and get second jobs. Let them stay here with that second job and pay taxes here. Let's make sure they're buying things here and helping the local economy. We don't want our police and firefighters moving out to Delaware, Tennessee, Florida. No, we want to keep them here, but we owe them a debt of gratitude. And specifically, we can monetize that. It's about $100 million, and that's after talking to all of the unions that represent these cops and firefighters. We can do it out of a $60 billion budget. We can't find $100 million to help our first responders when they retire? No way. We're going to do it on day one. We know that more than 1 in 10 New Jerseyans are struggling with a disability. And I have to tell you, it's not about funding. It is about getting the government bureaucracy to work hard for our families and our disabled community. We have to talk about independent housing. We have to talk about cutting and streamlining the bureaucracy. Why are there several departments that families have to go through? And why do families have to start the process all over again when their children become adults? We ought to have one streamlined department and use the money in an efficient way to empower those caregivers to take care of their family members. They want to do it. They want to get their kids and the adults who are suffering into independent housing and help them as much as possible. New Jersey makes it harder. We're going to make it easier. Car theft out of control. Home invasions out of control. What are we going to do about it? Well, the first thing we're going to do is declare a state of emergency, and I'm going to suspend bail reform. So when these teenagers or early 20s or however old they are get pinched for stealing a car, they're going to stay behind bars. That's number one. Number two, we're going to fill all the judicial vacancies and lower the amount of time, reduce the amount of time between arrest and trial, and start handing out tougher, stiffer sentences. We're going to change the rules of engagement for our police officers so that they can arrest more people. That is the only way to do this. We've already got a line of defense. They're called police officers. We need to empower them to do their job. And when they do their job, we need to keep the bad guys behind bars. And then we need tough judges who are going to hand out longer, tougher sentences. Crime should not pay, and we're going to make sure it doesn't. New Jersey transit is a problem. Ask any commuter that sits on the train for hours on end. And of course, it's easy to blame Amtrak, and it's true, they do own the tracks, and they are to blame in a lot of cases. Our federal government doesn't run their trains any better than we run ours. But here's the bottom line. We need to change the way we think about transportation. Number one, I'm going to eliminate the electric vehicle mandate. We are not going to convert these buses into multi-million-dollar drains on the taxpayer. That's right. Every one of those buses that they want to convert from diesel to electric batteries, millions of dollars to the taxpayers, and years before you can even get them built. What you may not have known is most of the transit commuters on NJ Transit are taking a bus, not the train. So we've got to fix this across the board. We're going to partner with private companies like Boxcar that are now commuting people in and out of New York. And I'll tell you something, they're doing it more efficiently than we're doing it. Why is there a bus holding 54 people running empty in the middle of the night? We need to bring in experts in logistics. That's number one. Number two, we need to monetize the assets. They're sitting on property that could be rateables to local towns, which would help offset your property taxes. Number three, we need to move to a closed system. What does that mean? We need to take those 166 train stations across the state and make sure that you are showing your ticket before you get on the platform. We're losing tens of millions of dollars when you've got people showing their tickets on the train. And I'll tell you something, it's not the fault of the engineers or the conductors. It is the fault of the system and the bureaucracy in Trenton that won't allow us to innovate. We're going to bring people in that understand how to make the trains run on time and understand the logistics of delivering people to where they need to go.